War. It's a heavy word, isn't it? It brings up these immediate images, but the reality, the effects, they go so much deeper than the battlefield itself.
They really do. We're not just looking at headlines today.
No. We're going deep into the messy, long-lasting fallout of armed conflict.
Exactly. And the sources we've been looking through, they paint this picture of war as a truly transformative event. It touches everything: economies, people's lives, the environment.
Culture, politics.
Yeah, all of it. It's like this intricate web of impacts, and we really need to get our heads around that.
So that's our goal today, right? To sort of follow those threads, see how that initial spark of conflict sends ripples outwards.
Mm-hmm.
We'll dig into the economic side, the social fractures, the damage to the environment, what happens to culture, how power shifts, and something really important, the devastating impact on children.
And what really comes through is that the actual cost of war. It's just so much bigger than, counting up military budgets or what it costs to rebuild a bridge.
Right. It changes lives. It changes nations fundamentally.
It really does.
Okay, so let's start with the economy. That's often, top of mind.
Yeah.
Our sources mention a 2012 estimate. War and violence costing something like 11% of the global gross product.
Yeah, that's close to $9.5 trillion back then. An absolutely staggering figure.
Wow. And what's the immediate hit from that kind of cost? Where does it show up first?
Well, a huge chunk is just the physical destruction. Bombing roads, power plants, factories, shops, homes.
All the basics.
Exactly. When that infrastructure gets hit or just becomes collateral damage, a society's ability to function economically just plummets.
And rebuilding takes, forever and costs a fortune.
Both in money and just the sheer effort, logistics, yeah.
You see that so clearly right now. I mean, Gaza, for instance. Yeah. The sources talk about damage to UN buildings, schools, hospitals.
Bakeries, roads.
Just everything needed for daily life. How does that kind of destruction, when it's so widespread, translate into, the bigger economic picture for people actually living there?
Well, first, there's the immediate humanitarian crisis, obviously. But beyond that, destroying these things, it cripples how people make a living.
Right.
People can't get to work if work even still exists. Businesses fold. Getting goods in or out becomes impossible.
It's not just the immediate damage, it's the long shadowed cast.
Precisely. It hits employment, trade, stability, making any kind of recovery incredibly difficult.
But interestingly, the sources also pointed out some maybe unexpected economic shifts. Like in conflicts, you mentioned the Iran-Iraq War, Liberia, Rwanda. Women sometimes moved into jobs usually done by men. How does that happen?
Well, in those really extreme situations, you have huge numbers of men being conscripted or becoming casualties.
So gaps appear in the workforce.
Exactly, big gaps. And necessity just forces these changes. It opens doors, maybe temporarily, for women who were previously shut out of certain jobs.
But does it last? That's the question, isn't it? Do these changes stick around after the fighting stops? Or is it just a temporary fix?
That's the critical point. Does it actually lead to lasting empowerment, or do things snap back to how they were before? It really makes you question the deeper structures.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. And then there's the whole concept of opportunity costs.
Yeah.
And when all this money and effort goes into the military,
right,
what doesn't get funded?
Exactly. Yeah. That's a huge point in the sources, all that military spending. It's money not going into schools, hospitals, social programs.
Yeah, I remember that Eisenhower quote you mentioned.
Oh, it's powerful. Every gun that is made signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed.
Wow.
It really just perfectly captures those fundamental trade-offs, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The social side of things. One of the most visible impacts, I think, is displacement. People forced to flee.
Oh, absolutely. The UNHCR figure from 2015, over 65 million displaced, 21 million refugees.
And that was years ago. With Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, those numbers must be even higher now.
Tragically, yes. It's an ongoing crisis.
What does that level of mass displacement do to a society in the long run? Beyond the immediate need for aid, I mean.
Well, it just rips the social fabric apart. People lose everything: homes, jobs, communities, their support systems, their sense of belonging.
Everything familiar.
Everything. And that creates long-term instability. It puts enormous strain on the displaced people themselves, obviously, but also on the places and communities that take them in.
And then there are the invisible wounds, the psychological trauma. We hear about PTSD in soldiers maybe affecting, a quarter of combat veterans?
Around that, yeah. But the impact on civilians, especially refugees who've seen and experienced unimaginable things. Some studies show PTSD rates going up to, well, 86% in some groups.
86%. That's almost everyone in some groups. How does a society even begin to function with that level of trauma?
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult. Widespread trauma has huge long-term effects. It impacts kids' education, people's ability to work, how people interact, just basic social functioning.
And if it's not addressed,
Untreated trauma can fuel cycles of violence, make reconciliation harder. It really hinders the whole process of rebuilding. It begs the question of what resources, what support is truly needed to heal those invisible scars on a massive scale.
another really worrying social impact is education getting disrupted. Schools literally become targets. Kids and teachers are in danger. Learning just stops. UNESCO says over half the world's out-of-school children are in conflict zones.
That's right. And girls, marginalized kids, they face even bigger hurdles.
What does that do to future generations?
Right.
That education is just gone for so many.
It creates this ripple effect that can last for decades, generations even. Without education, opportunities vanish, poverty gets worse, you lose the skilled people needed to rebuild.
It creates a kind of vulnerability, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A sense of hopelessness, potentially making societies more susceptible to future conflict. It's a devastating cycle.
Let's look specifically at gender now. How war impacts men and women differently. The sources seem clear. Men might be the majority of, say, combat deaths.
Right, the direct casualties.
But women and girls often bear the brunt of the indirect stuff. And horrifyingly, sexual violence.
Yes, the UN Security Council specifically recognizes that. Women and girls suffer disproportionately, especially when those social safety nets, community structures break down. They become much more vulnerable.
And the use of sexual violence as an actual weapon.
It's abhorrent. It's used strategically to terrorize, to humiliate, to break communities, assert control.
What are the lasting effects of that kind of targeted violence?
For survivors, the trauma is immense, physically, psychologically. It can last a lifetime. But it also shatters communities, creates deep stigma, and makes peace and reconciliation incredibly difficult. Supporting survivors, holding perpetrators accountable. It's vital for recovery, but often, frankly, overlooked.
Yet, we also touched on this earlier. Sometimes war does shift gender roles, right? With men away fighting, women step into new roles.
Yes, that definitely happens. Women take on jobs, community leadership roles, things they might not have done before. Necessity dictates it.
But again, the question is, does it last? Do those sources suggest these changes stick?
The evidence seems mixed. Often, those traditional power structures, those gender hierarchies, they tend to snap back once the immediate crisis is over.
So the gains might be temporary.
Often, yes. And there's another dark side, too. Some sources point to a rise in domestic violence in conflict zones, the stress, the trauma, the breakdown of order. Like one study linked house demolitions to more marital violence. So war can also make existing inequalities even worse in some ways.
That's deeply troubling. Okay, turning to the environment. Another casualty of war, often with really long-lasting consequences.
Definitely. You've got the obvious directed damage bombing, deforestation for resources or tactics.
Scorched earth type stuff.
Yeah, right. But also the indirect harm pollution from destroyed factories or military waste, habitat destruction.
Can you give some specific examples of that kind of long-term damage?
Well, Agent Orange in Vietnam is a really stark one. Decades later, the Vietnamese government still estimates hundreds of thousands killed or maimed, huge numbers of cancers, birth defects, all linked back to that chemical defoliant used by the U.S. military.
Decades later.
Yeah. Or, more recently, concerns about depleted uranium used in munitions in Iraq, and potential links people are drawing to cancer clusters in certain areas. It shows how the environmental fallout can have serious long-term health impacts.
It's a grim reminder that war's footprint can last long after the fighting stops, poisoning the land for future generations.
Yeah.
How does that environmental damage make recovery even harder?
It just adds another layer of difficulty. Degraded land affects farming. Clean water becomes scarce, public health suffers. It can hold back economic recovery, even fuel new tensions as people fight over what few resources are left.
War also attacks something less tangible, but maybe just as vital: cultural heritage.
Yes. The sources talk about deliberate destruction, looting, sites just being damaged in the crossfire.
We think of the Nazis looting art in WWII,
Right.
but it happens in modern conflicts too, right? Targeting specific cultural sites.
Absolutely. And as Karl von Habsburg points out, this isn't just random vandalism. Targeting cultural heritage can be a deliberate tactic, a form of psychological warfare.
How so?
By destroying the symbols, the monuments, the artifacts that hold a community's collective memory, their identity, you're trying to undermine their very sense of self, their history.
Attacking the soul of a society.
In a way, yes. It's an attack on their connection to the past and their identity in the present.
And that loss is irreplaceable, isn't it? It's not just objects. It's the stories, the traditions they represent. You can't just rebuild that.
Exactly. It raises big questions about protecting heritage in wartime and about accountability for those who destroy it intentionally.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the political sphere. War obviously shakes things up politically.
Massively.
Regimes fall, new countries might emerge, the whole global power balance can shift. The example given was the Second Liberian Civil War, leading to Charles Taylor's removal, then democratic reforms.
And Ellen Johnson's Sirleaf's election. That's one potential outcome.
What broader patterns do political scientists see? Is there a historical link between war and how states develop?
Well, some scholars, like Jeffrey Herbst or Charles Tilly, they've argued that historically, particularly in Europe, wars between states actually helped build stronger states.
How? That seems counterintuitive.
Their theory is that the immense pressure of mobilizing for war forced states to get better at taxing their populations, building bureaucracies.
Ah, okay.
And it also fostered a stronger sense of national identity, like us against them. People became more willing to pay taxes and support the state when facing an external enemy.
But do our sources suggest that still holds true today, with modern conflicts often being internal or involving non-state groups?
That's the key caveat. Contemporary conflicts might work differently. These internal wars, conflicts over identity, sometimes they lead to state collapse or fragmentation, not consolidation. The outcomes can be much messier, politically speaking.
So that state-building effect might be a thing of the past, or at least not universal anymore.
It's definitely more complex now. Modern warfare dynamics can lead to prolonged instability, borders being redrawn in ways that don't create strong, stable states.
Right. Now, through all these different angles, economic, social, environmental, political, there's one group that consistently emerges as tragically vulnerable: children.
Yes. UNICEF's estimate: 250 million children living in conflict zones. It's hard to comprehend. They face physical danger, trauma, losing their education, poverty.
And the horror of child soldiers, around 300,000 worldwide.
Approximately, yes. Often forced into it, abused, just robbed of their childhood. And the fact that maybe 40% are girls, that brings its own layer of specific vulnerabilities, including sexual violence.
It's just sickening. And the casualty figures, they're just heartbreaking. Syria, something like 12,000 child deaths reported since 2011. And Palestine, during the 2023 Gaza conflict, reports of over 12,000 children killed in just a couple of months.
The scale it's almost impossible to process.
It really underscores a fundamental injustice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Children, the most innocent, bearing the absolute worst consequences.
It absolutely does. They suffer the most profound, the most lasting damage. It raises huge ethical questions about our collective responsibility to protect them.
So wrapping this up, it's just crystal clear, isn't it? The impact of war isn't just the fighting. It's this vast, interconnected web. It leaves these deep, lasting scars on economies, societies, the land itself, our culture, our politics.
And as we've really tried to stress, those impacts aren't spread evenly. It's the marginalized groups, it's women, it's children who suffer disproportionately, who carry the heaviest burden long after the guns fall silent.
So really understanding all these different facets, these deep costs, it's not just, an academic exercise.
Not at all.
In a world that's still grappling with so much conflict, getting this bigger picture is essential, isn't it? For trying to prevent wars in the first place, for providing aid that actually addresses the full range of needs.
And for building a peace that's actually sustainable, a peace that acknowledges and tries to heal these profound, enduring wounds.
It's a sobering thought, but maybe a necessary one if we want to move towards a different kind of future. Really understanding the true cost feels like the first step.